Time you spend in line to get coffee. Time you spend stuck in traffic. Time you spend in the movies. Time you spend in the mall. Time you spend texting. Time you spend playing video games. Time you spend partying. Time you spend goofing off. The time you take to vote, it's what really counts.
Our forefathers fought for our right to vote. Throughout history, the fight waged on by the generations that followed.
This next story helps us to answer the question, why vote, from a historical perspective.
Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. When Thomas Jefferson wrote those words, he and other members of Congress signed the Declaration of Independence to ensure the future of this nation. They put their lives on the line, believing that this country would be better off if the people ran it themselves instead of a king. Listen carefully now as we go through the history of voting. Our country established the right to vote during the late 1700s. If you were male, white, the age of 21, owned property, and were a Protestant, you could place your vote to whichever delegate you wanted. But you had to make sure you were prepared to die for what you believed in. In the 1800s, the population grew and spread all across the continent, and more men were granted the right to vote. By this time, many political parties were beginning to rise. Now, in the 1860s, African Americans were granted citizenship with the 14th Amendment. Eventually, the right to vote in the 15th Amendment. No one, not even the government, could deny them the right to vote. This allowed Hiram Revels to be voted the first African American in the U.S. Senate. In 1920, after protests and even some arrests, women were granted the right to vote. Susan B. Anthony was a suffragette who said,
"It was we the people, not we the white male citizens, not we the male citizens, but we the whole people who formed the Union."
But there were further changes to be made. In the 1940s, citizenship and the right to vote were granted to the Native Americans. And in the 1970s, the age of voting was lowered to 18. And because we have evolved into who can vote, we as a nation have accomplished many wonders. Who knows how far this nation can grow, just because you are voting.
One day, this nation will rise up free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at
last. Here's your top 10 reasons to vote. 10. Voting gives you just as much power as a superhero. 9. To keep a roof over your head. 8. To get you out of the house. 7. To keep college tuition from rising. 6. So you can't complain. 5. To keep idiots out of the White House. 4. The American Idol got your vote. Why can't the president? 3. Because Florida doesn't know how. 2. To make a change. And the number one reason, to make a change back.
Why vote? What can be so important that makes us as citizens go to the polls and choose to vote?
We asked everyday people as well as a professor of history to tell us how, through voting, everyone can choose to make their voices heard.
We went around to ask all kinds of people why they vote, and if they felt voting was a way to get their voices heard. This is what they had to say.
Your opinion matters, and the way to express it is through voting.
It gives me a chance to show all the issues that I'm involved in, and by voting, you know, I have a say in those issues.
I think it's one way that we get the opportunity to participate in this system and this democracy.
That's the only way you can directly influence who's in Congress, who's in the Senate, and who's in the White House.
It's absolutely necessary that everyone votes to get your voice out. It's the only way you can be heard.
Demonstrations may draw attention to a certain issue or protests, but that doesn't get things done.
Saying and doing is a completely different thing. If you show in action by voting, then you're actually casting your vote towards change.
We then sat down with Professor Aram Hassami from the History and Political Science Department at Montgomery College to discuss how voting allows individuals to voice their opinions to our government.
The most direct way to influence public policy is voting. And if the citizenry is not represented, for the most part, politics becomes the privy of the rich and the powerful, and therefore it becomes more of an oligarchy or an aristocracy or elitist. The threat of having worse type of government should be more incentive enough to do it. But that doesn't mean that individual votes do not count. Therefore, your direct voting will be the best weapon you have to influence public policy. They will have to court you, they will have to come talk to you, they will have to go to small states, they will have to come to college campuses and see what people want.
Make yourself heard. Your vote is your voice.
Protecting the right to vote has special significance for those who've never had it.
Well, there's the 15th Amendment that provided the right to vote to everybody, no matter what their ethnicity or color, is what the actual text says. The 19th Amendment gave women the right to vote. The rights to vote, though, that led to these amendments came through significant amounts of protesting. There was the women's suffrage movement that involved hunger strikes in front of the White House. Now, the right for African Americans to vote came about, like I said, the 15th Amendment before the right to vote for women, but many people found that Jim Crow laws were able to be used to dissuade them from voting.
As American citizens, it is our privilege and our right to vote. Throughout history, countries without a democracy ended up in an unfortunate situation. Unable to speak for themselves, they couldn't provide a future for their children. They wake up each day dreaming of opportunities.
I would say that voting is a right. It's a right, like I say, that people fought, died, bled, were imprisoned for. It's a right that should be used carefully. You want to be informed why you vote. It's important to know why you're voting, not just to vote for the most popular, the person who seems like they're the most jolly, but think about the issues. And so I would argue that it's a right that is not to be taken lightly.
Countries have been torn apart. People lost lives. In the US, we are able to walk freely and let our dreams guide us. This was not an easy process. Today, we are able to make a better future for our children. We have a say in everything that goes on in our country. We have the right to vote. Having rights is what really defines us today. So, as Americans, we need to preserve those rights that makes us free. Free to think, free to talk. We are the children of today's nation. Let's make sure that we make this world a better place for our future children by voting today and expressing our freedom. We don't want this privilege taken away from us, so let's protect it.
Can you believe that idiot Johnny told me he's going to vote?
We never vote. You waste precious TV time.
My parents don't vote. I don't vote.
The bridge had collapsed on both ends.
Pick one.
What caused this mess? Some lobbyists and scum-sucking un-American companies who avoid taxes and shift their fair share of medical costs to honest taxpayers. How do we fix these problems and create a better America for our children?
Politicians care most about being elected. Your vote makes good things happen.
This land is your land. This land is my land.
But only if you vote. Your vote will cause change and make good things happen.